Okay.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming out this Saturday to Denim Days. This is a wonderful panel that I'm excited to dig into. My name is Whitney Mcguire. I will be moderating this discussion. I'm an attorney for creative entrepreneurs and co-founder of an initiative called Sustainable Brooklyn, which works to bridge gaps between the current sustainability movement and targeted communities. So let's just jump right in. I'm joined by an amazing panel, and I'll just have you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about your work.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Square. First off, thank you all guys for coming out. Yes. And thank you, Miko, for organizing this panel. And thank you, Whitney, for moderating. My name is Jonathan Square. I teach at Harvard, and my area of focus is Afro-diasporic fashion history and visual culture. And my specific research area is the dress of enslaved people, how enslaved people styled themselves, fought for more identity, fought for more freedom, expressed their identity through clothing and style. And I have a digital humanities project called Fashioning the Self in Slavery and Freedom, which explores this topic in depth.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Kim Jenkins. I teach at Parsons School of Design and Pratt Institute. My area of focus is fashion studies, which is sort of a broad, newish field that explores why we wear what we wear. So my work is about fashion meeting at the intersection of politics, psychology, sociology, anthropology, race. I created a class at Parsons a few years ago that's still running called Fashion and Race, where I explore the intersection of fashion and race in various ways. I had an exhibition on fashion and race that I curated last year, and I'm working on a new one in partnership with the Abrams Art Center. I have a digital humanities project as well called fashionandrace.com that provides just open sources for all things fashion and race if you're interested. And most recently, I've been hired on as an educator, like an internal educator consultant for Gucci. To help them with cultural awareness and sensitivity.
Yes.
So they don't
let them know, Kim. Let them know. And hi, I'm Miko, Underwood. I am the founder and chief creative officer of Oak and Acorn. It's the first sustainable brand in Harlem, sustainable denim brand in Harlem. I'm also an actionist and creative consultant for We Got Us Now, which is an organization that is built by, led by, and for children of incarcerated parents. What else? I do many things. I'm an artist, so I do a lot of things, but I was happy to curate this panel with a bunch of incredible people that I am honored to sit with, but I'm going to let Whitney take it from here, and then we can get going. Thank you, everyone. See, I told you it was going to be exciting. So we're here to discuss denim and the African diaspora, specifically the legacy that's untold about this connection. And denim is, when we think of denim, it's a symbol of American idealism, right? It's a fabric that symbolizes adaptability, rebellion. However, denim and workwear in general have been used to essentially attempt to relegate Black people to a permanent second class. And as I was prepping for this panel, I noticed a common thread woven throughout the history of denim and the African diaspora, and that is the thread of resilience and inherent sustainability. Descendants of enslaved Africans have patched the inevitable holes the holes left when one is stolen from home and forced into generations of slavery. And we have created this beautiful fabric of culture and experience for the entire world to partake in. But as with many contributions of people of color to culture, our contributions to denim have largely gone unrecognized until now. So let's talk about it. Jeans are made of cotton, dyed with indigo, reinforced by rivets. Then the once thriving economy of indigo trading provides a good entry point for this discussion. So Miko, tell us a little bit about the connection between indigo and the slave trade and how we got here. Okay. So when we think about indigo, the first thing we think about is its connection to denim and clothing. My experience of understanding indigo came from my years, almost 2 decades of experience in the denim industry, and I started to do real research to find out like why, what's the connection, what happens. But when I started to really dig in about indigo altogether, I found that indigo was the hidden commodity of the slave trade. It is actually what began to propel the slave trade in general. And then it went into rice, sugars, rum. But what happened is there were indigo farms that were people were enslaved, and then they were migrating the people and to create indigo farms throughout all of Americas, Central America, South America, all throughout the Caribbean. So people were being traded and migrated into these places to create indigo. Because indigo was considered this blue gold. It was this incredible commodity, and people had not seen it. Europeans were really enthralled and mystified by this color, which had medicinal properties, but it was also, for instance, from West African women, it was considered a dowry. They would contain indigo blouses and fabric, and that was part of their dowry, and just by them retaining the indigo, it would create a family legacy, and by which they were to the point where they were diplomats in their community. That's how valuable indigo was. So the story of indigo is really interesting, and to find out that it had propelled the slave trade and how we had gotten into the Americas, it's kind of mind-blowing to me. When I started to really look at the trajectory of indigo, I started to see my own genealogy. I saw my Caribbean roots, I saw my Central American, Latin American roots, I saw my African roots all through the thread of indigo. So I thought it was really, it really helped me to question, like, why am I so excited and connected to denim, and that's what brought it back for me.
Thank you. Yeah, I see, like, we think of the height of the slave trade, we think of cotton, but, rarely are we even aware of how integral indigo was to creating our modern economy today. And specifically within South Carolina, I was interested to notice that this indigo trading right before the Civil War really created significant wealth in that region, both in South Carolina and in Britain.
Yeah, so indigo, at one point when the currency was devalued in the United States, indigo became the currency. There were huge plantations in South Carolina that were making indigo cakes as a form of currency.
Wow.
Indigo, it's really incredible.
So, thank you for that education. So, with the increasing demand for indigo, we also see a simultaneous demand for more slaves. And this demand was fulfilled throughout the transatlantic slave trade for probably well into the turn of the century. So, clothing this population of enslaved people became an industry itself. Jonathan, can you tell us a little bit more about this industry and how workwear sort of came into the picture?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to remember that forced labor is a really important driver of the fashion industry then and now. So thinking about cotton and indigo, which are two main components of denim, those were two major commodities of the slave trade. And, people always focus on cotton and they neglect indigo for some reason. But if you remember, that one of the first prototypes of the American flag was dyed with indigo, and that, Christopher Columbus's sails were dyed with indigo, and that enslaved Africans were bought, sold, and transported to the Americas in exchange for indigo. So it's a color that's dyed in the American fabric to a certain extent. But thinking more specifically about denim, enslaved Africans were involved in the cultivation of cotton and indigo, but they were also fashioning themselves out of fabric made from cotton and indigo. And has anyone heard of Negro cloth? So if you
All about people. No Negro clothes.
But Negro cloth was essentially cheap cottons or linens that were the cotton was grown in the American South and it was transported to the Northeast and manufactured in the Northeast and in Western Europe and shipped back to the American South. So it's basically cheap fabrics that were used to clothe enslaved peoples. Negro cloth doesn't describe the composition of the material. It could be cotton, it could be linen. Sometimes it was a mixture of linen and wool, but it describes the inferior quality.
And hemp.
And hemp.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hemp before cotton.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, and what they said about Negro cloth, if I can add, was that it was unfit for anyone else to wear except for slaves. So the first enslaved people were wearing this denim fabric, and that was just the status.
Mm-hmm. And I know you might ask, like, why would a slave owner buy cheap fabric that's going to fall apart? It wasn't that. It was more about they weren't willing to invest in nice clothing for enslaved peoples. And typically, I mean, there are many ways that enslaved peoples acquired, different wardrobes. But many plantation owners bought boats of Negro cloth, and enslaved peoples were responsible for making their own clothing. Simple trousers, shirts, shifts. But thinking specifically about denim, I think it's important to remember that it's a 19th century story. It begins in the 19th century, more so like the latter half of the 19th century, and over the course of the 19th century, African Americans started incorporating more and more denim items into their wardrobes, well into the 20th century, of course, when it becomes a fashion item.
Thank you. So slave cloth essentially became a marker of social status. And this, when I was thinking about this, I thought of, just like my own family's attitudes towards denim. I was raised in part by my grandparents, born in 1917 and 1919 respectively. And their relation or their approach to denim was just that it was a no-no. You didn't wear it if you wanted to look nice. And for them, looking nice and presentable was inherently tied to liberation. So I'm always curious to know what people's, especially people from the African diaspora, what their family stories, or their approaches to denim are. So I'm wondering, Kim, if you can give us a little bit of an insight about how your family sort of approached denim or how it showed up in your life.
Do we have a photo?
I don't think so.
I think of one photo which isn't present. It was a picture of my parents in the 1980 when we first moved to Texas. And I was born in Detroit, so my mom was from up north, and then my dad was from the south, and they had very different perspectives when it came to liberation and freedom. My dad grew up poor, my mom grew up kind of, middle class up north. They didn't even know what Juneteenth was, so they had a very different experience. But when they moved to Texas, because my dad was working for IBM, I have this photo of them kind of immersing themselves into the southern kind of Western culture. He's wearing these dark jeans and a big belt buckle, and my mom's got this kind of billowy blouse and kind of a dust skirt, and went and got some cowgirl boots.
Okay.
And so they were just really getting into it. But it's interesting because my dad, in his attempt to sort of climb the corporate ladder and just in working through social mobility, moving away from, much like what you were saying in your experience with your family, moving away from working class clothing or clothing that was showing any kind of struggle, it was just imperative for him to not kind of be seen wearing something like that. So he doesn't understand the idea, or I think a lot of older people, people from the baby boomer generation don't understand why on earth would you want to wear jeans with holes in them. It's very triggering for my dad. He grew up poor in the South, and so having jeans with holes in them and having to get patches, it was just, he was made fun of by the other black kids at school. He just thought, I want to get away from that. So that's one perspective I have in terms of denim, but there's definitely respectability politics at play when I was growing up. And so it was very performative and sort of assimilating to Texas culture when they were wearing the sort of Western outfit that I have in a picture frame in my room. But yeah, it gets complicated when it comes to the Black American experience and social distinction through what you wear and what that expresses about your kind of social position.
Absolutely, and I'm curious to know more about the shifts and just like the attitudes towards denim. You know, we have respectability politics within the Black community, but within just like traditional gender norms, women started to really adopt workwear and denim in particular around the turn of around, like you said, in the 1900s when denim became prominent. And I'm interested, Jonathan, to know your perspective about that, the ways in which women have started to approach denim and what that meant for the turn of the century.
Absolutely. I think World War II was a really pivotal moment in like the history of denim. You know, World War II was a moment of disruption to a certain extent. You know, 2.5 African American men drafted for World War II, and many African American women volunteered. And so I won't say that World War II upended racial and gender norms, but it certainly was a moment to rethink or disruption in like gender and racial norms. And so this is the moment where you see African Americans starting to embrace denim, not just because it's practical or because it's durable, because it's also a fashion item. And I think we have an image of a black Rosie the Riveter. I don't think we did. Oh, okay. Well, we had an image of a black Rosie the Riveter.
Is she on there? No.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well, we've all seen.
Okay.
So yeah, you know, during World War II, a lot of the men were fighting in Europe and on the Pacific Front, and women had to, you know, do factory work or like work outside of the house. And of course, after the dust settled after World War II, things were able to go back to where they were. So this is the moment where you see African Americans adopting denim. One, because of changing racial and gender norms, but also because of, you know, the civil rights era, which we're going to talk about later, and how it's a form of resistance and it's a form of activism, but also this is the moment of the youth quake, like, you know, baby boomers and the youth movement, and there's a loosening of moral strictures and aesthetic values, so people are incorporating more workwear, more casual clothing into their wardrobes.
So as we're seeing this sort of opening of attitudes or loosening of attitudes towards denim, we're also seeing a simultaneous boom in the prison labor sector, which was ushered in by abolition. The industry of slavery the industry that enslaved Africans or enslaved people contributed to did not just disappear. So laws were put in place to make essentially existing as a Black person illegal. These laws helped usher in the early days of the prison labor sector and the prison industrial complex. And we see within the turn of the century, around the 1900s, another boom of prison labor and incarcerated individuals. Miko, can you talk to us a little bit about this like underbelly that's going on within the denim conversation around this time?
Of course. So what I was able to dive into and really get an understanding about the connection, well, first I could say that the prison experience is a personal story for me. My dad has been incarcerated, which is going on 31 years this year. And I've been working with this organization that my sister started around children of incarcerated parents. But I never imagined that my career in the fashion industry would be connected to prison. So when I really started to dig into denim and its connection to our history and what was happening, I started to see that, you know, just from the very beginning when slaves were enslaved people. I hate to say slaves, but enslaved people were were given freedom or gained freedom. They were then recaptured and considered contraband and put into these penitentiaries to continue working as laborers, which had then became, as you said, clothed in these fabrics. When the cotton boom came, that became a way of manufacturing. We had a very huge manufacturing industry that exploded on the East Coast first. America's rise in capitalism grew because of the cotton industry. And the manufacturing industry was funded and continued to be funded once slavery was, quote unquote, abolished through the prison system, and it was continued to be financed by Wall Street and all up in the East Coast. And it wasn't just people like to say that slavery was a Southern issue, but it became a national issue. And then, as we can see, it's a global issue. And we can still see how prison, up until modern day, there was prisons in, I believe it was, I can't remember if it was Oklahoma or Wisconsin, but they were propositioning Nike to be their workforce through the prison system. So we have a real system of...
Texas still has of cotton picking.
Yeah. And
my grandmother picked cotton.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there's a real system that's still happening within the prison system that is a free labor system. And you could see the remnants of this starting again with the immigration that's happening. We had this conversation around what's happening with, these young people being held, kids being taken from families. That's how it started. I don't know if we have, that's an image of children that were taken from their families in juvenile camps and became the laborers for manufacturing. So yeah, it's a horrible system, and this is why we fight against incarceration, because it's still propelling, it's still happening. It's happening right now with the kids at the border. It's happening with families. It's a horrible situation. So yeah.
Thank you.
We were talking about con. Was that related to?
Yeah.
Sorry, I dropped names. Sorry, because we were also talking about Brooks Brothers also. And
Yes.
We
were talking about.
We met as a panel before this.
We didn't want to mention any names, but there are mills and factories that we all very much know in denim industry who have had a long legacy. Anyone that has a mill or a factory that's had a long history in America was connected to creating, making, milling, enslaving people, using their workforce to create clothing. So that goes all the way to a factory that I won't name, a mill I won't name, that just closed a couple of years ago, who has a long history of this type of, exploitation of people.
Thank you. So switching gears a little bit, I wanna talk about this black cowboy example. So normally when we think of a cowboy, we think of usually this white, husky-looking person with a lasso, and they're on a horse.
The Marlboro Man.
Yes, the Marlboro Man. But the interesting fact that I learned is that most cowboys post-Civil War were formerly enslaved black people. And this historical fact is rarely mentioned in conversations about the cowboy spirit / ethos. And apparently this is because barbed wire was introduced around the turn of the century, and this essentially put black cowboys out of work. This is something that was used to keep cattle contained, but it was quickly then converted to contain human beings. So that connection between the prison labor force and denim is prevalent throughout that history as well. Although I must note, actual cowboys did not wear denim. The jeans were then repurposed and created to, be more comfortable around like the 1900s. So that's just a fact. Okay, so let's talk about civil rights. Kim, So the sentiment amongst Black people toward denim and workwear, we already acknowledged, began to shift around civil rights movement. Can you tell us a little bit more about how denim then became a marker of revolution for Black people?
Well, I guess in general, you have people, well, there's like two camps of thought of Black people in their effort for self-determination. By the 1960s, there is the wearing of denim as a way of just kind of showing their oppression in an illustrative sense. There's also, it's also being worn as a means of solidarity for the struggle in labor. But also there's another camp of thought, this respectability camp of thought, where it's all about wearing kind of your Sunday best to not give white people an excuse to feel that, these, inferior, this inferior.
You don't want to give them
people.
another reason to think we're inferior.
So it's just all about pressing your hair and just wearing, a suit and tie as you march. But then you had people like Snick running against that and wearing denim and overalls. A friend of Jonathan and I's, Tanisha C. Ford, has a beautiful book, Liberated Threads, where she's done extensive work on researching the power of dress in terms of like the civil rights struggle and how Black women were growing out their natural hairstyles and embracing denim as a way to just kind of express themselves in that way.
And we also start to see a steep rise in incarcerated Black people around this time too. You want to talk about that? No? Okay. So in response, hip hop music started to give a voice and creative freedom to a generation, creating conditions for a few fortunate Black designers and hip hop moguls to start their own brands, primarily using denim. But even into this day, these designers and their wear are not considered quote unquote fashion, but more like streetwear and urban wear.
Urban. Talking like 1990s.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts for all of you about just this designation and this attempted?
Well, that's where I got started in the industry, so it was very near and dear to my heart. I started as head designer for Baby Phat, which is on the comeback. She's making a comeback. I remember being very, I grew up with hip hop culture. I felt very close to it, very tied to it. And what we would see in the late 80s, early 90s was that representation of how we dress was really connected to our communities. So specifically in New York, and you guys can speak to where you guys are from, but specifically in New York, in the suburbs, we had more of like the preppy look, which you'd see like groups like Brand Nubian, you'd have like De La Soul and these guys who would have more of a preppy look, more like a suburban look. And then you have more of the little edgy look. You had Dapper Dan, who was making like the all over MCM sweatsuits, the velour sweatsuits. Some guys had suits on or like dress shirts, more of like a house music look, like dress pants and dress shirts. And you would see like all this diversity in clothing as to where the location was, but denim was a staple. And we would see brands like Tommy Hilfiger would go out and really try to use these artists, because what happens is artists would talk about their culture, they talk about what they're wearing, they talk about what they're drinking, they're talking about their experience. And you would see like these brands say, oh my God, this is an opportunity here. So they would take them and use them as the faces of these campaigns without actually giving them any real equity in these spaces. So I mean, you guys can speak to us like what was happening West Coast and in the South around.
I think when it comes to, we talk about fashion, denim, and hip hop music specifically, I think it's interesting the silhouette, the style and the color of how these groups were all wearing jeans. Like I think of the West Coast and NWA and just having more of a like black jeans and or wearing Dickies and so just wearing it in that way where it's just more form-fitting. But then you'll have in other parts this infusion of skateboard culture with some hip hop heads. So you have like the skinny tapered jean. It's more form fitting, a little punk also. And then you've got a more baggy style on the East Coast. And then I know we were talking about kind of reminiscing about different labels around like Washington, D.C. The girls would wear like, is it Parasucos?
I think we said, did we say Parasuco and then
Cross colors.
Sergio Valentes.
And there was also
and then Jabot's more.
Jabot was huge. Cross colors. I think we took
Pele,
Fubu.
Pele, yes.
Pele, yeah, wow.
So you've got all these different labels just coming out during this time. The 90s is such a pivotal moment for street style, but for all these subcultures to kind of like go in and sort of capitalize on this and have, because it's not just hip hop, you've got like skateboard culture coming out with their own labels, surfer culture coming out, like Ocean Pacific, all these labels just kind of wanting to represent themselves in that way.
Right, they also had the space because the music started to explode, so they were also able to amplify this look and this culture and this, themselves.
Apple Bottoms, by the late, that was like
by Nelly.
Early 2000s. So
I've been thinking about this like late 70s, mid 80s moment. I'm thinking about Willie Smith, and I have to shout out my friend Daryl Lisby, who's helping curate an exhibition on Willie Smith at the Cooper Hewitt. But Willie Smith actually, he passed away in the mid 80s, but he had a brand called Willie Wear, and he was kind of an innovator in this like streetwear movement. But it wasn't like a hip hop aesthetic; it was more of like a deconstructed, preppy aesthetic. So I think Willie Smith is also a really important person to include in this conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I think what we're seeing, towards the later half of the 20th century is just this boom of the emergence of fashion, media, music, creating this like perfect scenario for denim and jeans in particular to be amplified and for the perception of them to be transformed. So I want to talk more about music and its relationship to denim. Specifically, we all know this Old Town Road song, right? Yes, Lil Nas X, wonderful artist, and there's been some backlash because he and Wrangler collaborated, and it's really telling because we're seeing this egregious erasure of Black people's contributions to denim perpetuate in this conversation. And where am I going?
What was the backlash that you saw with?
I guess for context, in case anyone doesn't know, Lil X, Black rapper, who has stepped into kind of the country music scene.
Right.
And when it comes to ideas of or concepts of authenticity and how the territorial nature of deciding what is authentic and what is not. When you have this kind of young Black rapper going into the country music scene, it's definitely ruffled feathers. I mean, like Darius Rucker's one thing, but Lil Nas X, he's bringing this kind of this hip hop style into it, and so then what you're referring to is this collaboration now with Wrangler,
and which, mind you, he's not the first country rapper, right? We've got Kid Rock. We've got other country rappers. So he's not the first to bring hip-hop to country.
Country grammar.
Nelly doing country grammar. Apparently, Nelly stayed in his lane long enough to not receive backlash. I don't know the designation. But anyway, Lil Nas X and Wrangler is really evoking this idea that the cowboy spirit is not synonymous with Blackness. So I want to talk to you guys about that. Like, what are your thoughts about that? And in terms of just like the way Lil Nas X is really revolutionizing this conversation and denim itself.
Well, yeah, because it's upsetting people because he's disrupting this country narrative or what Wrangler's supposed to be about or what country actually is, and the fact that he's going to be making money from this, So I don't know a whole lot about it. I've just heard the song. So
you just heard it? It's everywhere.
Like under a rock.
No, it's okay. I understand.
But yeah, I think of authenticity and the territorial nature of authenticity and not wanting someone like Lil Nas X to disrupt the narrative of what country style is and who gets to make money from these kind of collaborations.
Right. There's this conversation of appropriation, right, underlying this whole thing, and country fans are saying that this Lil Nas X, this young man, is appropriating their culture.
Get off my lawn.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like a get off my lawn when, hello, I planted the grass. Let's go. Okay? Talk about it. What are your thoughts?
Exactly. I think if there's like a takeaway or a thesis for this conversation, is that like things that are seen as being quintessentially American, whether it's denim or cowboys or country music, are actually quintessentially black. And we're sort of rethinking these American symbols and like sort of making them black or telling people the real history behind them.
Like all too often, yeah, when it comes to these narratives and through fashion history of what we talk about, our history of denim workwear and this manifest destiny, and this is the rugged look, you know, what we were talking about earlier, just these images, especially like major brands that are famous for denim, you know, it just using, retelling the story that this person was always white, or this James Dean character, or these rugged men, you know, gold miners from the 19th century, never including the black cowboys or Chinese immigrants all wearing these denim, you know, this denim wear.
Or even working class miners.
Right.
You know?
So it's time to, you know, decentralize that history there.
Yeah. I think what we're seeing with this idea, with this discussion of denim and, you know, this idea of American idealism is that American idealism comes with the, I guess, this like need to deny the legacy of exploitation upon which many industries within this country have been built. So we really see this perpetuated in denim, but we have sort of a response to that via Oak and Acorn. Hello. First of all, I just want to stand up and say that I'm wearing Miko's brand, Oak and Acorn, only for the rebels. Yes. You got it. You got it. So Miko, your brand is essentially a culmination of this rebellious spirit to reclaim the narrative of workwear and denim, while shedding light on the current injustices still happening in our country with regard to the prison industrial complex and prison labor sector. So tell us what's happening in the prison labor sector today, and how is your brand a direct response to this?
Well, thank you for that. First of all, thank you for the introduction. You're welcome. That was wonderful. Well, I think not just the prison labor connection, but I see the reason why I've chosen the coverall as the signature item is that because it connects to the farmer, the worker, the enslaved person, and all of these people who have been in some way impacted and embedded in our culture in American history. And the coverall is an evolution of the overall, which was the staple. And the reason why I've chosen that piece is because I feel like it's something that's just easy and wearable, and it's hot right now. Coverall is hot. Let's just call a thing a thing. Coverall is hot. And but yeah, my personal connection, as I said, my dad has been incarcerated for over 30 years now. And it was an opportunity to be able to use this brand to connect with an organization that's near and dear to my heart. My sister started an organization called We Got Us Now. Hi, Ebony.
Everybody give Ebony a hand. Yes.
We Got Us Now is an organization that is led by, and about children who have been impacted by parental incarceration. And what we do is really raise the awareness to this invisible population. Over 10 million children at some point in their lifetime have been impacted by incarceration. We're still seeing it happen now, even with the immigrant children. We see it constantly, and that's an epidemic. That's an epidemic, and that needs to stop. So we're really about raising the voices of this population. So the collaboration is, when you purchase something from Oak and Acorn, a portion of the proceeds goes to We Got Us Now, and we're always trying to amplify that space. So it's not only a sisterhood, it's a mission, focused brand. And also, I really wanted to be able to tell the story of our legacy in this product, of our connection. I just wanted it to reflect me. I wanted it to show, my history. I've worked in the industry for many years, and I never really felt like, I was really represented in the space. I didn't feel like I could see a brand that looked like me. Even when I designed, they were like, that's a little too edgy. And I'm like, oh, damn it. So so this definitely represents something that I love, and I feel like the timing is right. And that's what Oak and Acorn is about. And it's the first sustainable denim brand. Our fabric, all the product that we do make, we take denim donations. We also reweave and reconstruct and repurpose and re-engineer products. So you'll see some of that in our booth. But this is made of compostable and biodegradable denim, recycled cotton, and wood pulp. I think most of us know who are the denim heads know who makes this great fabric. So it was really important to be able to do a product that was sustainable, that was made in New York City, in Harlem. And I don't carry any inventory. This is probably the first time I'm carrying any inventory here at the show. We do everything made and cut to order.
Thank you, Miko. I really appreciate that, the idea of sustainability, not necessarily just including the environmental, considerations, but really just like the social impact of your business model. It's really important to me. I'm a child of a formerly incarcerated parent, and I just really appreciate everything that Miko and Ebony are doing. Thank you. Let me do a time check.
Oh yeah, do you guys have
over? Okay, we are right on time.
No, see, you open up for questions.
We got 10 minutes. Let's do questions.
What made you focus on sustainability, collaborating with also your past with dealing with incarceration and your father?
Can you say that one more time? What made me focus on sustainability and?
With the collaboration of the incarceration problem.
Okay. With your father. So working in the industry, my first experience of sustainability was a trip overseas to Pakistan. And this was my first real factory experience, and I was amazed. I was amazed by what was happening, the amount of production. But what really took me aback was to see the impact that the product was having on the people, and how they actually constructed the garments and all the chemicals that they were spraying on it. I would see indigo pools outside, and little kids playing in these spaces, and it was all this chemicals, and people weren't protected. And I really felt like, what am I doing in America? Like, we're creating a space for people to have jobs to, be sustainable economically, but what are we doing in America that we're contributing to this type of system? So it made me question. That was back in 2007. I started to think about, do I want to do sustainability? What is sustainability? I didn't really know what it was, but continued in my career to really push that. I thought it was just Pakistan because it was an unstable country at that time. But then when I actually moved to China, I saw that this was part of the, what did we have, the River Blue documentary. This is part of what the system was, in that it was creating this really toxic waste, and I was contributing to it. So sustainability had always been a through line for me, and in the industry, I've always tried to promote and propel sustainable practices. And as I said, when I really started to dig into, if I want to bring a brand out, because it was always in my heart to do something, if I'm going to make a brand, what kind of brand do I want to make? I wanted it to be grounded in a really strong mission. I didn't want it to be just about the money, because I realized as I gotten older that money is not the thing to motivate me. It's a great currency exchange. It's a great energy exchange, but it's not the motivator. It has to be grounded in something real, has to be purposeful. And when I started to see the connection to incarceration, it just made sense because it was something that I had already lived. So I hope that answers your question.
And the prison industrial complex is inherently unsustainable.
And also, if I can add on to something you've told me, is that, you know, you're reclaiming the denim space for blackness, but you're also reclaiming the idea of sustainability for blackness as well.
Oh, yes. And then this other part is that I don't see a lot of black women doing raw denim in this space. I don't see a lot of women doing raw denim in this space. And I've been a collaborator and an attendee of, you know, Kingpins Denim Days, and I love everything that happens here, but I don't see a lot of women like being the front runners in this space. So I was like, this is an opportunity, and we need to see more of us in these spaces. It's really male, you know, led, male, no, nothing against men, I love men. But it's just, we need to see more diversity in this space.
One more question.
So when did the enslaved people in the South actually start wearing, did they wear jeans actually? I mean, when did jeans, you know, the way we think of jeans come along?
So the coin jeans or dungarees was coined, you know, once Levi's and all these brands started to come up, but it had always been jeans. Like the first jean was hemp dyed indigo. And like Jonathan had said, like our American flag was made of denim. Quote unquote denim, because it was hemp dyed indigo, the American flag. So we have hemp, I mean, you can see, but a lot of these beautiful mills and fabric people that we have here, they have hemp denim. And that was like one of the first, you know, things that were made in denim. So they weren't called jeans, they were just called this really horrible fabric that was considered like very durable at some point, but always worn. What I thought was an interesting point was that women, the enslaved women back in the day, because they didn't have any protection for their legs, they would take their husband's jeans, dungarees or denim, and they would cut them and wear them as protection for their legs, you know, because there weren't any stockings, and they called them pantalets. And this was how sustainability was introduced, you know. It's something that inherently black people, we do. All of us know about that bag of bags, a plastic bag
of bags
under the sink or in the cupboard that we just, you know, nothing gets thrown away. That jar of oil, nothing gets thrown away. So it's like something that, you know, is passed down, you know, and you can see like even there's geese quilts. There's quilts. I have a lot of friends, like, you know, my sister's partner who's telling me about his grandparents making quilts from old fabrics, and that was the way that things were passed down. And there's geese quilts, was a collection of jeans from back in the day. I don't know what year was it, right?
There's just been, as we were talking about privately, you know, this whitewashing of sustainability and environmentalism, also in the food industry. Also, it's just like when it comes to farming and environmentalism, caring for animals, you know, it's just always, you know, there's sometimes, in my experience, there's been this surprise of, oh, you're black and you care about animals and the environment and sustainability, and you know, it's just somehow the narrative.
We've been doing this.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the Levi's, I just want to comment on that. Jacob, I forget his last name, but he's the one who patented the jean design, because miners were coming to him and their pants were falling apart, and so he reinforced them with rivets. And that's the only thing that like really sets apart the jean from the denim garment or workwear. Yeah, and this is around the gold rush, manifest destiny. That's a whole nother discussion topic.
A history supported once again with black people enslaved and then free and Chinese immigrants.
Right. One more question. Oh, no more time. You can talk to us after at Miko's booth. What's the booth number? Do you have it? It's just right down there. Thank you all for coming and listening to us.
I want to say thank you to Denim Days, Aaron. Thank you so much for letting me curate this panel. I really appreciate you so much. I want to thank everyone. Thank We Got Us Now. Thank Black Cotton. We have a 4th generation cotton farmer that's represented. His cotton is represented in our booth. And thank you, Whitney. Thank you, Jonathan. And thank you, Kim. I appreciate you guys so much.